So today, what I'll try and do is try and address three questions, but the way we'll do this discussion is try and address them very orthogonally instead of just directly, right? I mean, we want interesting perspectives to emerge. First, the first, let's say, hypothesis that I want to test is that senior executives with experience creates authority to teach, right? That's number one. That you have some contribution to make in the classroom. That's one thing we will teach. Second, from an academic perspective, in the absence of academic credibility, which primarily comes with a PhD and so on and so forth, your experience as well as some learning of the craft, the art and science of teaching makes you an effective teacher in the classroom, right? So that's the second hypothesis that we will test. And the third hypothesis that we will test through these conversations is that institutions, business schools, universities actually know how to use practitioners like the ones who are attending today and navigate them, guide them to actually create impact in the classroom and groom and nurture and grow future leaders and managers out of the classroom. So these are the three broad hypotheses that we will test today in this conversation. To get started, the first thing I want to get out of the way is there's a lot of ambiguity on what a professor of practice is. Like a professor, assistant professor, associate professor, maybe we probably get it. We get what a lecturer does. All of that we understand. But what exactly is a professor of practice is something that this panel, I know, has very interesting perspectives on because they've lived that journey. Why don't I start with you, Srini? I mean, in one sentence, like, what does a professor of practice actually do? Just demystify all of that for us, please.
Yeah, I don't think there's one answer. So a professor of practice, at least in my view, is a no. So in academia, most of the traditional faculty are on a tenure track in the sense that they finish their PhDs, they join, and then there's a very set track for them where they join as assistant, become associate, become full professors over a 10, 15 years of period of time. And that's tenure track. So a professor of practice is somebody with experience who has come into academia, who follows a different track, not the tenure track. And they are there based on their experience and things like that. So that's at least my broad definition of how to differentiate between the classic academic and the professor of practice.
I'm having some problem with my network. Is that only me or everyone else here?
No, we are good.
We can hear you.
All right, great. So while Shini gave us a very classic definition between tenure track and practice track, I'll flip this over to you, Prakash. I mean, you've lived multiple versions of this. What's your take on what a professor of practice actually is? I mean, if there's a simpler definition that one can start with.
Okay, so let me kind of, as you said, Murli, I think there are multiple ways of looking at it, and I've lived through the journey when this concept was not known in the Indian higher education space, and various institutions used various terminologies to describe someone like me, to today when almost every institution of value or repute does have a policy regarding this. But presuming most of our audience is from the corporate world, etc., let me give you an analogy to help establish it in your mind. A professor of practice is like a lateral entry. Okay, so there is the classical track. I was in Unilever or Intel. We would have join the organization as a management trainee, get through the rounds, basically get through your probation, get certified, and move on. And there's a regular track around over there. And as many of you who have been in organizations like that, which has a very established process of bringing in freshers and then taking them through the rounds, know the process is not that well defined for someone who comes in at a lateral entry. And therefore, what it is and that person the reason we call it as a lateral entry, and only in those organizations, is where you're coming in from some different kind, different domain, etc. So that's what it is. It's meant for people who have done something before. You could be an entrepreneur, you could be a corporate executive, you could have been an artist, you could have been a professional in some other sphere, and now you're moving into the world of academia and teaching. So that's really the major difference from how the organization looks at you. Okay. But as far as the students are concerned, the organization therefore decides where and which kind of students or courses you will teach. But as far as the students are concerned, ideally, there should be no difference. Okay. You are a professor teaching to the students, and therefore you are as much required to prove your stripes as anyone else over there.
Great.
Okay.
On no difference to students, I'll pick you up on that.
Okay, I think Murli will pick me up on that, but Shankar, why don't you take over while we get Murli's network going?
Yeah, so thanks, Prakash. So it is one way to look at it is where do you come from, right? So most of the time, an educator comes from the upbringing of knowledge discovery, systematic research, right? That's the upbringing that, right? And so which means you look at it, for you to understand professor of practice, you have to contrast theory versus practice, right? So predominantly educators are theory driven, or that's how the system has groomed them, right? So if you see, for example, a lot of places in business schools, uh, professors of acclaim, right? People who are extremely good, highly ranked educators may have 0 years of experience in the industry, right? Nor would they have, some of them, a lot of them don't even have an MBA, but they are teaching MBA, right? But the merit of them standing or given that podium is because they have a leading edge in terms of thought leadership or knowledge discovery, which is recognized through peer review at some level, right? Even if you're a PhD, it's being reviewed by a group of people. So I take this merit dimension, right? So what is the merit on which you're allowed to stand up on the podium is that your experience, your practice, right? So it's almost the think of it as a complementary role, right? So most of the time managers are trained to practice management, but the educators come from the theory of management, and now practitioners bridge that to say that we come from practice, and then we kind of help you bridge between what you learn in theory. So at some level, another way it manifests, I think Prakash talked about students and also type of courses you teach. And most of the time the theory led professors give you the first principles of management, right, the core courses, and practitioners are expected or generally adept in giving elective courses which are maybe very esoteric to their experience, right? So these are maybe few ways to look at it. And so you have no, what do you call, you don't have to have any defensive posture when it comes to merit, because you are complementing, your merit complements the institute's ability to educate. Yeah. Yeah. So
Only on mute.
I was blissfully asking a long question. My network flipped. But let's get to the root of this. We've understood what a professor of practice is, but let's try and understand the motivation. I mean, look, from one perspective, you're probably having a fairly successful career, 10, 15, 20 years. Hopefully everything is going well. Like, why would you want to subject yourself to this? Why a professor of practice? Where's the motivation coming from? Let's start with you, Prakash. I mean, many decades, and then a PhD, and then academics. What was your motivation? And then I'd love to hear the others also.
So, yeah, mine is a bit of an oddball case. It was something which was always in my plans, that I would take a few years off and get into academia. I just wanted to see it from the other side. It was supposed to be a sabbatical break. It was not supposed to be life in general. The sabbatical break just continued, and it's now 16 years. Uh, Obviously, the parts of it, significant parts of it, which I enjoy and love, and therefore I'm doing it around over here. And I think to kind of broaden it a bit, I think each of us will come with a separate set of motivations. At the same time, within this panel itself, as well as broader, I've come across people who really wanted to do it and have done it at a different angle and at a different pace, etc., and stuff like that. So it could be any kind of motivation. This was what it was in my case.
Srini, your motivation?
Yeah, so I come from an academic family. So I joined a PhD program in 1989 in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. But after a few years, I realized that something was not right. So I told my academic advisor, Professor Seymour Sudman, that I need a few years break. Let me work and then I'll come back. And he said, yes, we'll keep the thing open. Come back whenever you're ready. Unfortunately, that whenever I was ready became almost 30, 30 years. In between, once I did attempt, so I did, I was the first, I guess, professor, the first executive PhD to be admitted into IIM Indore. This was, I think, in 2013 or 2014. But again, my travel, I was commuting multiple continents and it just didn't work out. So I guess third time, lucky in 2018, when I joined ISB's EFPM program. I think that was my third attempt at doing this. And this time I said, I have to this. I don't have time left. I can't tell my advisor again that I'll come back after a few years. There are very, very, very few years left in any case. So yeah, so for me, it is, I was joking with somebody the other day that I became the black sheep of my family when I didn't join academics. So finally, my family has accepted me saying, okay, this guy is all right.
Nice, nice. So we have a planned sabbatical. We have like extreme example of persistence. Like one goal, karo ya maro, we'll get there. What about you, Shankar?
Hey, mine is a very simple thing. See, if you look at this panel, right, I look at Prakash as a first generation pioneer, right? Because even before the program that I joined, the executive fellow program, and I was working in Singapore, and I knew his mentor from my MBA days, right? So we knew that there is such a species that is existing, right? So through Prakash, right? But to me, Srinivas Pingali became the second generation pioneer because we were in the same batch in our executive fellow, the PhD program. But my entering academia is an accident because see, I joined PhD because consulting assignments are always shallow, right? So I've been a career consultant, so you could never solve a problem to its logical conclusion because of billing rates, right? So you just solve it good enough to collect the check and move on, right? That's what you do in consulting, and that leaves you, if you're intellectually oriented, that leaves you with a gap. That gap was piling up for 20, 15, 16 years, right? And when ISB launched this, I took this program, even though it was part-time. After my coursework, I quit my job in Singapore, moved to India to just pursue it full time. The goal was to get back to corporate. I wanted to get into the industrial labs of the uh, Fab 7, if you may, right? To say, because there is a demand for it, but life had other plans, right? When I started teaching, when I was pursuing it full time, and I had this opportunity in IIM Udaipur, the hook was the joy, right? So the sheer joy of being an educator cannot be compensated for anything else. So at some level, if you see this, I discovered that joy by accident, and I was too greedy not to give it up.
Nice, nice. And at this point of time, maybe it's also useful for me to pitch in with, let's say, my motivations, because we're seeing 2, 3 different dimensions. For me, it started as a little bit of what you said, Shankar, in terms of as a senior leader, you're dealing with a lot of breadth. You are possibly mile wide, inch deep, whereas research gave me the opportunity to go like mile deep into one thing. But as I met a whole lot of really smart but super humble faculty through this entire EFPM course, is when I said, maybe, you know what, I can learn the art and craft of teaching and translate all of this learned experiential wisdom into the classroom. So that became my trigger to even go down this path. We'll take one question in this section and move on to how does one even get qualified to become a professor of practice. And this is more demystifying, which anybody can answer. Multiple terms: professor of practice, adjunct faculty, visiting faculty, clinical faculty. I mean, this is like a faculty soup. Can you please demystify this for all the participants today? What does each one mean, and what should one aspire to be?
You want me to go?
Please, Shankar, start.
Yeah. No, so I think the distinction which Professor Pingali brought in, basically the one which is, tenure track versus non-tenure track. That's the basic distinction. And the rest of it is a commitment of whether you are in the college's payroll or not, are you on a contract? These are all contracting mechanisms, right? So either you're a career academic who's theory driven, or you're a practical academic or a academic who is practice driven. but the mode of engagement, in some places, professor of practice is what they call as a full-time professor who's on the payroll, right? Clinical faculty is another such category. So I kind of without overcomplicating it, these are contracting mechanisms. An adjunct faculty is called upon on a contract basis. If there are 2 courses to be taught, they say, why don't you teach this every year for the next 3 years, right? So it's almost a task driven. So you now look, so the various designations, we should look at it from an institute's perspective, right? So the institute primarily has what do you call a fixed capacity and a flex capacity, and the flex capacity is also a function of demand, right? For example, today we don't teach as much agile driven management as we did 8 years ago, right? And today it's a lot of product management. 5 years from now, it'll be something else. So at some level, the institute looks at the practice-based faculty as a flex, and that flex can be either a full-time on payroll or part-time on contract. And that's the way I look at it. All these designations are doesn't imply there are so many varieties of educators.
So what should people aspire to? I mean, Shankar, you know the IIFR ECP program. So what kind of role should people aspire to? Is it fair to say that maybe I start with visiting faculty, and then once it starts getting contracted, I think of adjunct faculty, and when I have full-time available, maybe it's a professor of practice engagement. Is that the journey?
Yes, you could see the simplest way people get engaged as for guest lectures, right? So this is not even a faculty, right? We pull, I mean, for example, Srini and I pull so many people from practice as part of our courses, so that we bring in the industry perspective, right? That gets you a taste of what it takes, right? Most of the time we underestimate the effort required to deliver education, and we overestimate the knowledge that we have. So this is a good test of how far can I last with 15 years of experience? If you ask that question, probably you can last for 1.5 hours, right? So see, so if you just want to represent what you already know from work, we realize we know so little. So that's a discovery phase. That discovery phase is something we should have. You should have your legs in both the worlds, right? Don't give up your cash flow, but just discover the joy of learning, right? Or teaching. So when you do that, I'm not saying we don't have enough to teach. We just don't know what to teach, right? So that's the part, right? So the moment you start generalizing from your experience and think like an academic, I mean a Pracademic, then you suddenly discover that your experience is not in isolation, right? It connects with multiple things. Now, if you come from, for example, a social sector, a typical question that people who apply for ECP, right? A couple of them from social sector, they ask me, are there, educators required, or is there course related to social sector in B schools? That's not the most optimal question to ask. You have to say, okay, I stand for this expertise. What are the adjacencies? So this discovery happens, you being a guest lecturer, when you start co-teaching a course with another faculty, right? So that's a visiting faculty thing. And then as a visiting faculty, you can teach full courses also, right? So where you don't give up your security of your job, right? So that's the visiting faculty. And then when you're serious about full-time academia, so that's where professor of practice or adjunct faculty come into picture. Professor of practice typically is a affiliation to one institute dominantly. An adjunct faculty can have multiple affiliations, right? The trade-off is that, there is a guaranteed, obviously the institute will prioritize a professor of practice more than an adjunct faculty when there are teaching loads, right? So I would think of it as the first discovery of joy, discovering the joy of teaching. You teach what you know, then you start teaching what is required along with somebody else, and teach a full course. All of these are together in the visiting faculty mode, right? And then the other one is, in one institute, you're a professor of practice. In multiple institutes, you can be an adjunct faculty. Adjunct is basically that you are a part of a flex capacity for that institute.
Got it. Super useful. Extremely clear, at least to me, and I'm sure the participants would feel that too. Let's get to the next section, which is having established the foundation of what a professor of practice, clinical adjunct, visiting, etc. is. How does one even get qualified to become a professor of practice? Quite often, there are multiple things that one hears, right? Hears in double quotes, that a doctorate is required to teach at a business school, whereas people often talk about UGC saying, look, there is this role of a professor of practice, up to 10% of roles can be POP roles, and anybody with 15 plus years of experience gets qualified to be a professor of practice. Can we kind of peel some of the layers of this this onion, and let's say start with Prakash. You took the formal doctoral route. You said you took a sabbatical, and being an academician was always clear to you. Let's come from another dimension here. So how did the doctorate make you a better teacher? And in the absence of a doctorate, to some of the participants or some of the audience today, what would you advise them, what path to take to eventually become either an adjunct faculty or a professor of practice?
Sure. Let me put it in context. Okay, I have the advantage, as Shankar said, he fossilized me. So being the first generation one, let me kind of put it in context. First of all, what have we heard till now? Okay, the most important thing is what is the lay of the land? And I think Srinivas said it very clearly. One is in terms of the internal organizational mechanism of the institute, which is tenure or non-tenure. And the other point, which I think, Shankar, you illustrated very well, is in terms of contracting mechanism. So this is the landscape. We have looked at it from the educational standpoint, but it's important to kind of look at internally as to where are we. And I would say it's another 2 by 2. What's your motivation and what's your need? Why are you doing it? And the first point, which we all, I think, have said it at various stages, is if your motivation is you want to go out and tell, this is the wrong place. Okay, so that's yes, you can come for a couple of guest lectures, etc. But I think, Murali, you articulated very well in terms of that's 1.5 hours out of a 20-hour course, right? So your motivations have to be defined. The motivations will decide what route you want to take. So it's not something which is binary. I need to do this and therefore I will become this. The route, am I looking at it as a full-time career? Am I looking at it as a part-time kind of engagement? Am I looking at it as a different experience? Am I looking at it as something which will provide me the next financial cover? Each of these should ideally define something different. And at least in my case, I didn't have the answer. I was supposed to do it for 2 years. I continued doing it. And one fine day, during a flight with a senior faculty member from IIM Ahmedabad to IIM Calcutta, between Ahmedabad and Calcutta. And by the way, in those days, I was teaching in Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and Calcutta, and each institute had a different designation for me. And even today, you will find that the designations which different institutes use are quite different. And that's when he gave me a very nice piece of advice in an analogy in Bengali, which I understand. And he said, see, you have to decide whether you want to be the playing field or not. And if you have been here for as long as you have been, because that was my 3rd year in academia, I was teaching across each of the 3 institutions and a few others abroad. He said, if you really want to be over here, then you need to get a seat in the table, and for which the qualification of getting a doctorate is important. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it depends upon, even today, you can get into institutions. There are many of us who may not have had a formal degree, but they bring in phenomenal strides to be teaching the subject which they do. So it's not that I straight away jump, get a PhD, and therefore tomorrow I'm ready and qualified to be a faculty. The qualification happens in different ways. And I think later on we'll talk about what this program does, what a PhD program does, what an executive program does. But I think it's important to kind of get that clarity in your mind. It's unlikely you'll have the clarity immediately. So just like you go through a training period to figure out whether you like the job likes you or not, it's important to kind of wet your hands before you make the next major commitment at this stage of your life.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'll segue on to Srini to build on this. So one takeaway is, look, if you want a seat at the table, then maybe a doctorate is required. But if you want to teach, if you want to convey learning, then hey, as long as you're qualified and you have some useful material to convey, you could get started. Srini, if you can elaborate on what are the options, what are the routes in front of people to start pursuing this? Shankar alluded to some of this in terms of visiting faculty, co-teaching, and so on and so forth. But I'm sure there's a lot more. I mean, this is not an easy maze to navigate, right? How do you identify what can you teach, which institutes, how do you network, how do you open doors? I mean, can you spend some time helping the participants understand?
Sure, Murali. But I want to take one step back from that, right? While a lot of the conversation so far has been focused on teaching, a professor of practice does a lot of other things as well, right? So there's teaching, obviously that's a primary role, but then there's research, there is writing case studies, which is something that is expected of professor of practice because we have that industry knowledge and experience and the connects to write case studies. And the fourth expectation of professor of practice is to get actively involved in the administration of these institutions because we bring that administration experience. So, for example, when I joined IIM Udaipur, that was my first academic role. Within 2 months, I was put on 6 committees. So there was a placement committee, there was some other committee, there was pre-placement committee, there was a POSH committee, there was so I was put in some 6 committees. Shankar joined after me. He was put in the IIM admissions team, right? Because there is this feeling that we have come with this corporate experience and we know how to manage things. So therefore, they give us a lot of these tasks, right? So there is teaching, there is research, there is case writing, and then there is administration, right? Now, even within teaching, there are different layers. So obviously, there's the undergrad teaching and there's the grad teaching, which is a standard. But then there are corporate programs as well. So today, for most academic institutions, especially in the business schools, the largest revenue earner is corporate teaching, is corporate programs, right? And then there are open programs as well. So that is really any kind of program that is open to the lot. So if you really see, there's a whole lot of ways, whole lot of things that a professor of practice can do. If, in my view, if you're looking at just the corporate teaching part of it, then you don't need any kind of a doctoral program because that is really based on the experience that you have gained over years, and you have to find a way to kind of share that experience, right? But any of the other forms of teaching, at least for me, I found that, and this was one of my faculty told me this, and I share this with almost everybody, right? So what he said is that, you have war stories which you were sharing as a guest speaker, but that's of no use to a student because what will they do with their war stories, right? I mean, as Prakash said, they'll clap and leave, right? You have to give them the frameworks that they can build on which they can build their own war stories. And that's the fundamental difference between a visiting faculty and a regular faculty, is that you have to link your war stories with the frameworks and then allow students to develop their own war stories based on that, right? So, but when it comes to that, even though I did finish an MBA, by the way, I never finished my PhD, but I finished the coursework. So technically I did get an MBA. But frankly, most of us have been through this, and when we get into corporate life, we forget all the frameworks that we have learned during MBA programs and things. Maybe we'll use a few frameworks here and there, right? So for me, the biggest benefit I got from a teaching perspective when I joined a program. Sorry, Murli, I'm not answering your question, but I thought it's critical to kind of bridge this gap. Is that I relearned all the frameworks. In fact, I learned some frameworks for the first time. And I was sitting there in a class saying, oh, I wish I had remembered this when I was doing something in my corporate life, right? Because in corporate life, it's all brute force. We don't actually go back to frameworks and things like that. It's done and dusted. We finished our MBA. We got a job based on that. Good luck, right? But so it was almost refreshing my mind and it also built the whole sense of curiosity, because as you get senior in an organization, your jobs become fairly routine. You're managing people, right? That's the primary role of a senior manager, some strategy work, some people management. So I had lost that whole intellectual curiosity, and I think a PhD program actually ignited or reignited that curiosity in me. So it was learning the frameworks, it was reigniting the curiosity, it was giving me the academic networks, and also it was teaching me research methods, which is something I had not done, right? So for me, at least, enrolling in a doctoral program, whether it's doctoral, lecturer, executive doctoral, I'm sure we'll talk about that, it made me relevant to the new career that I was building. So I just wanted to add that professor practice role is actually far larger, right? If it's just the admin side or just teaching corporate programs, you're good the way you are today. But if you want to pick up any of the other things, then I think a doctoral program becomes critical.
Then let me just pick that up and throw a question, and anybody can answer. This entire process of converting war stories into structured pedagogy, structured learning journeys through frameworks and so on and so forth. So, I mean, can you learn that exponentially on the job through trial and error, or are there better ways of doing this?
So I'll take this on. Sorry, go ahead, Shankar.
No, go ahead, please.
So, I think first of all of us have heard it. I now tell it to my PhD students also and other students, the war story part of it. And I also experienced it. The first time I went, actually, I had a great faculty mentor, my prof in my alma mater. After the first couple of classes, and I had straight away landed up into a 30-hour program, which I had developed. After the first a couple of classes, when I thought those starry eyes were really kind of in awe of what I was telling, it took me about 2 sessions to realize that they were glazed. And that's when I went back to my prof and said, what's happening? And what he said next was very, very humbling. He said, Prakash, yes, you've been coming in as a guest lecture. They have been clapping and you've been feeling very good about it. But let me kind of explain to you the role you were playing in my course. You are basically the filler. So you are like the hydration break, okay?
The item number, Prakash.
Time out, the item number. Those days we didn't have item number. Remember, I'm fossilized, right? So, and therefore, what he said is, there has to be an outcome out of what you are doing. It's not about what telling your audience, it is about preparing them.
Yeah.
It's about, and it takes me back to the Einstein quote. What is the role of education? The role of education is not the knowing of facts, but training the mind to think. And unfortunately, in our corporate roles, as I think both Srinivas and Shankar and Murali have explained, the more you go up the ladder, you are caught up in the routine. So it's like a worm's eye view. You're kind of moving from week to week, quarter to quarter, etc., meeting the next objective, the next board meeting. Whereas what the role of an educator is to be able to step back and look at things and put it in a context that is replicable. That's what the consultants have simplified and called a framework. Okay. So what can I learn out of this, which I can replicate in a different situation? And what a PhD program effectively ends up doing is providing us the structured way of looking at things to elicit out of that some learnings which can be reapplied again. That's also at the core a very simplified definition of theory. So the primary thought which we come with that, okay, this is theory and therefore this is not applicable and this is practice, and each side tells, like Kipling, never the twins shall meet. Your PhD program, especially after you come in with professional experience, is ideally supposed to be the bridge which Rudyard Kipling said will not happen. And that's, if there is a motivation for you to do that, that's when the program becomes necessary. If you are happy kind of being a domain expert in a particular field and kind of seeking out audiences, as Srinivas said, yes, there are corporate programs. You can even get in and do a workshop for undergrad or postgrad students, etc. But when we make that mind shift about how can I enable others and can I do it in a structured manner, that's when one finds the gap to kind of go through a rigor to be able to do that.
But where do you learn the art and science of doing it? That question, I think people would be keen in understanding.
If I may, pick from both what Srini and Prakash were saying, right? Frameworks, right? A way to think about. There are two So a PhD helps you discover your own frameworks at some level, right? You are trained to create your own theories, your own frameworks, right? So there is a via media in between, right? So I am a corporate experienced educative interested in educating others. And then there is other end is a trained mind which can theorize, right? Which is either you come from practice or from theory, that you are trained to do research and theorize, right? There is something in between. The in between part is, can you map your experience and your learning objectives and the messages you want to deliver to existing theoretical frameworks? See, there is a huge body of knowledge in terms of theory, right? And most of the time I built my personal, intellectual journey on existing frameworks. For a lot of time, I've used what I learned in ISB in my consulting career, right? Most of the time I was accused of being theoretical, right? That's why it gave me a motivation to get back into academia, right? Because the practice has a disdain for theory, right? But when it comes to education, what you could do is use your experience. I mean, see, look, I want to be candid about this, right? This is a little bit of commercial for the ECP, right? So to say that it is not like if you want to use frameworks, you have to do a PhD. So that is for you to create your own and then build your own intellectual standing, right? Here, if you have existing frameworks across multiple disciplines from marketing to finance to strategy to HR, can your issue that you are trying to address be delivered better or abstracted better from existing theories, right? This is the part which ECP has a focus on, which is framework of frameworks, right? So the point is, there are two things I want to say. One, the via media is train your mind to look for existing frameworks to tell your war stories, right? That's a shortcut to being effective in a classroom, right? The second one is that typically in academia, people are trained to talk about frameworks and theories in one discipline. A marketing professor spends a life in marketing and spends a life away from other disciplines. Look at it's very hard for one marketing professor to publish in OB, HR, strategy, and finance. They don't, right? So the disciplines are really hard coded. But if you're a practitioner, there is never a HR problem standalone, right? Most of the time, business problems are interdisciplinary in nature, right? So if you can train yourself to use interdisciplinary frameworks to tell your war stories, one, it sticks, and second, it differentiates, because the
Nice.
classical educators are trained in one discipline or one family of frameworks. So that's something which it doesn't require 3 years of commitment, right? You can do that. You can get introduced in 3 to 4 months, and then you can start practicing it. And of course, so you're not going to make it perfect day zero, but you're going to evolve yourself, but you're in the right direction, right? So then you can run faster so that you can get, maybe you will discover the joy of doing a PhD in that process. But I feel that there is a via media for practitioners to start using theoretical frameworks of others, great scholars. And the good thing is you can use the best in class. Right? You can take the best strategy framework for your class, right? You can cite it and say, this is from Harvard, but here is how I tell my story.
Got it. So two big takeaways for me from this super enriching section. One, of course, is converting experiential wisdom into learning in the classroom, and the second is
Hey, is it just me? I mean, I've lost.
No, the second learning was about the network. Yeah.
Network.
Sorry, was my network working again?
Yeah.
I don't know. This Saturday morning has just been really bad. The UPS keeps going on and off. So, I mean, two things we learned. One, of course, is converting experiential wisdom into learning journeys in the classroom and using, even if it's existing frameworks, to just make all of that experience that I have into something that people can use in a structured manner and reuse. But the other point that I will pick up here is one of mindset. Let's take someone who's got 15, 20, 25 years of experience, has been VP, senior VP, CXO, whatever in some organization. They should literally have a red carpet in business schools. I mean, I'm sure business schools love such people. They really enrich the entire classroom, bring a whole new perspective. So how do people get started? Or is there another side to the story?
Do you want me to take that, Malik?
Yeah, please
start it off. Yeah. So I think for those of you who are interested, in getting into academics on a full-time basis, right? it's almost like starting a new role, right? It's yes, you have all those great experience and things like that, but you have to have that humility to say, I'm starting something new, and I have to get into the learning mode for the first 2 to 3 years. And I find I worked with several professor of practice and in the last few years, and I think that has been a huge challenge for them, because they're there at a senior level. They're used to, certain lifestyle. They're used to certain teams, having some large teams. They're no longer individual contributors. They're managing teams, and suddenly you come into academia where you're back to being an individual contributor, and you're starting at level zero again, right? Maybe not level zero, but you're starting at level. And that has been, uh, while I'm making it sound simple, that has been a huge challenge for a lot of people who are transitioning into this, saying, but I did this, so it doesn't matter. You're now in a new world, and you have to establish yourself in that new world, right? The transition is actually quite challenging, and I know all of us have struggled through the transition in the initial years, but I think we have found our peace with it, saying, okay, this is how we go about it. So,
Hey, so again, the other side of the coin, right? So I say, yes, it is hard. You have to go through it. But most of us are seeing it from the other side, right? You've crossed that. Man, the amount of, see, one is you become an individual contributor, ground zero. And number two, you don't have a boss. See, look, how many of us can imagine a situation where you don't have a boss, right? Even if you're a CEO of a company, you are answerable to the board, right? Here, the only thing that stands between you and absolute liberty is that students should feel that you are adding value in the class. That's a primary dimension of adding, right? So as long as that validation is there, then you are intellectually or at liberty to do anything, right? So for example, the amount of courses that between Srini and me, the types of courses we have launched, right? So think about this. This is a business school. Srini starts designing a course which is digital enterprise management, which is a technology driven MBA program for experienced people, right? So look at the intellectual liberty that you have, right? You're going to craft 1 year full-time commitment of some 50 students who have 5 years of average experience to offer themselves to learn what you have designed for them, right? So that liberty is unheard of, right? The scrutiny is done in the process, right? When the students validate it. And second, look at the varieties of courses, right? So, I mean, I can talk for myself, right? I teach Internet of Things for managers, right? Until recently, Internet of Things was not even a disciplined course in engineering colleges, right? So then there is artificial intelligence for managers. Then there is digital transformation. Then they had blockchain in fintech. See, you look at, I mean, most of the time I talk about technology because some of us anchor technology for management as our discipline. But there are people who tell stories about, leadership lessons from world literature, right? So they play movies in the class and then, I mean, contemporary literature, right? So the amount, once you cross the burden, establish your credibility as an educator, which is a hard thing to do for 2, 3, 4 years. And after that, you have an infinite runway, right, to launch yourself in whatever direction, and the amount types of courses that you can launch and the places that you can teach, right, levels, right, to MBA students, to early managers, to CXOs, right? So that liberty is something which is extremely gratifying, if you may, right? So I just wanted to see what the other side looks like. While you start on one side, it is arduous, but once you cross the hurdle, the amount of liberty we enjoy is you can't gain it for any price, right? So with
But I
that,
just want to make sure that this is not a highlights reel. But I don't want people here to get seduced in the role with the highlights reel. But let's go back. Like the hurdle is not easy. Let's go back. Let's go back to how the process starts off right at the beginning, right? And the first thing is just opening doors. Some of the conversations that I've had, they're like, look, how do I even approach people here? Right? I don't have the experience. I've done a few guest lectures. Is this good enough? Will IIFR ECP offer placements? Right? That's one part. The second part is, can you just walk me through the first couple of years as an adjunct faculty, visiting faculty, guest faculty? Are you just handed over a curriculum and say, go deliver? Or do you have the liberty to modify some part of it? Or can I bring my own content to the table? So how do I open doors, and how do the first 2 years look like? Anybody in the panel, please.
So let me kind of take the first few years around over there. Okay. Ideally, it should be a discovery phase for you. If anyone over there is feeling that I have had a very, very successful corporate career or whatever career, and therefore I'm ready to come over here and do this, pause, have a rethink. And do you actually have the content? Do you have the skill? Do you have the patience? And most importantly, do you have the humility? Because it's an extremely humbling experience. The first guidance I give to people is, if your mindset is, I have so much to share, then really recalibrate.
Yeah.
The biggest transition is when you move from the thought process of, I have so much to share, to the thought process of, oh God, I have so much to know. That's when you have crossed the first hurdle. The second part of it, and I think Srinivas kind of mentioned that also, is yeah, sure, the red carpet got you the entry, but then you are on your own. It's like, Vaibhav Suryavanshi got into the team, but then he was in UK and he has to prove it and restart it from all over again. Sure, the talent will come, your ability will come, but then you have to hone it. To take the promise of what you have, but to actually translate it into reality is a completely different ballgame. And the reality is, for the last 10, 15, 20 odd years, you have not been doing this. So it's important to have the humility and recognize that I need to figure out how to transition into being an educator. Okay. There are a lot of guides available internally, in the sense that almost everyone is willing to help. There is no one who's your manager. Everyone's a peer, everyone's a friend. They all come in with a different kind of experience. Again, to be able to seek out that experience needs one to recalibrate that I have walked in over here and I've kind of won this battle already, into knowing that I'm starting a completely different, fresh, new innings in a completely new sport, in a completely new territory. And once you do that, your inherent skills kind of shape up and you start adding capabilities to yourself. For me personally, the most exciting part of this journey has been that every week you get the opportunity to start afresh and say, okay, I know nothing about this, but I want to add this on into what I bring in. I don't think I had that opportunity 3 years after my initial days in the corporate life. The system was kind of pulling me through, etc., and stuff like that. And maybe the kind of opportunity to do something different or exciting would have been once in 3 months or 6 months. Out you have the opportunity to do it almost every week. That's the difference.
Murli, if I can take 30 seconds of this on this, right? So this is a very difficult, because it's, you time and again when you question yourself, and there are times you get validated almost on a weekly basis. So I at least use my lighthouse these moments was that the best way that this will organically unfold is, at least if you can cultivate this, be interested in the student. See, if you are interested in the student, you will do what it takes to make sure that the time they spend with you is useful, right? So these are two things, right? Being interested in student and being mindful of making sure the time they spend with you is creating value for themselves, right? So that being interested in student has been extremely helpful, because there are times where the questions that you get asked, right? There are times people used to ask me, is this course even relevant for where I'm going to go, right? You will get asked existential questions, and I'll tell you, the knees will fold like a cloth, right? I mean, with all the pomp, you go there and you have a first fundamental question of, find me one reason why I should listen to you. This will happen after 4 hours, 6 hours of lecture, right? After 3 days, right? And there, the only thing is, rather than trying to defend your existence, the way I used to do it is flip it to say that I know there is an arbitrage that I have with the student, right? How do I make the student realize it? And putting the student in the center makes a big difference in going through these, what do you call, sinusoid of the initial years.
Murli, I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to add one point, right? And it's also related to a question I think that Vibha asked in the chat. So yes, there is a genuine problem that in traditional PhD programs don't teach how to teach. It used to be there. For example, in IIM Bangalore, till about 7 or 8 years ago, if you did a PhD program, you had to be part of the MBA program for the first year, so you at least got to see your audience or your future audience, right? But most regular PhD programs don't spend too much time on how to teach. And I think that's where the executive doctoral programs are different, because they do spend a lot of time on things like, obviously, how to research is taught in every kind of a PhD program. But where executive doctoral programs differ is that you are taught how to teach, taught how to write case studies, again, something that a regular PhD program doesn't do. So I think that's also, to the question that some of you asked, that the executive doctoral programs actually have workshops and things on how to teach. And I think that's also critical, right? Because we are no longer boss talking to employees. We are faculty talking to students, and it takes a very different mindset to do that. So when I went through the program at ISB, and we were taught by Professor Phil Zarillo, whom Prakash knows well, and I always tell Phil, whenever I said, in all the coursework I did in 2 years, that's the coursework I cherish the most, because he taught us how to teach and he taught us how to write case studies. So just wanted to add that.
Super, super. One last question, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested in this. Look, I have the capability, I have the expertise, I have the motivation, I can build the skills. I'm willing to learn afresh. I'm willing to eat the humble pie, like be humble, etc. All of that is fine. At the end of all of this, monetarily, what can I expect?
Let me illustrate this with so when I joined IIM Udaipur as my first academic job, I called Shankar and said, this is what I'm getting paid. And Shankar said, oh, wow, that is a corporate salary. So I said, no, Shankar, that's not my monthly salary. That's my annual salary. So I think that more or less illustrates. So yeah, so people do ask me this question all the time. And I say that you have to reset your expectations. You need to be decently financially secure. This is not going to get you the big bucks. There are no ESOPs in this. You have to do it for the passion of it. Yes, it does pay decently well. You can, I think salaries have gone up now in the private universities. So if you take up a full-time role, you can get by. But this is not nowhere close to a corporate salary.
Let me kind of put a bit more of perspective from my fossilized early days. I'm Calcutta for a full course would pay enough for me to take my friends in Calcutta, who I was coming after a few decades, for dinner during those 5-6 days. It just about covered the dinner bill very well. I think it's I don't know what it'll do now, but yeah, it's come a long way since those times, and your motivation has to be beyond the finances part of it, or the larger part of the motivation is, are you willing to reset yourself? It's not just finance is one aspect. You have been through that route as finance. You have been through in terms of acknowledgement. You've been through in terms of what Shankar said in terms of an individual contributor versus having a team working for you. So it's almost like I'm going back to ground zero in a new space. And what you need very clearly is a high level of self-confidence to take that journey, because you're not going to get daily reassurances that you have done a great thing. And particularly those of you coming from a corporate background, if you're not straight away getting into a full-time faculty engagement, where at least you'll have a check, you might compare the check and find the zeros missing. The fact that you're getting into something where everything is kind of grounded back to zero, and you're willing to kind of go through the entire journey, it needs a different kind of self-confidence and motivation. So be prepared for that.
Right. A greater sense of purpose for sure, self-confidence, motivation. and maybe a deeper desire to multiply the impact of your learning into hundreds and maybe thousands of students, I think. And that's where the real joy would lie as a teacher, because you're just creating so many more people who'll go create impact. I mean, for me, that's a big driver. I'm guessing a lot of you are resonating with that. With that, I will end at least the first section of this entire panel discussion. Dr. Srini, Dr. Prakash, Professor Shankar, thank you so much. This has been an engaging discussion. And I've been looking at the number of participants from the very beginning. Every time, it's only been higher than the last time I checked. We've had a packed house today, super engaged audience. I'm sure they learned tons. Thank you so much. This has been super enriching. I'll just open this up for a few minutes. We're right at the 12 o'clock timeline now. A few minutes, if my panelists can spare the time to answer a couple of questions, and then we'll have to wrap up. Please feel free to mail me, and I'll get the answers from the panelists and share it with you. The discussion just took so long. I'm sorry if all of us were in raptures here. Any questions that people will have, let me look at the chat. Quite a few. Anything that you want me to pick up from here, if you have seen the questions, because I was busy moderating. A PhD has nothing to do with skills required to do a good teacher. Yeah, I mean, Vibha's point is bang on. Lokesh says, while many engineering institutions, both government and private, now having strong industry collaboration, research, how does the role of professor of practice continue to create unique value? So his question is, engineering institutions, maybe even some B schools are doing it. There is a lot of industry collaboration. So what's the value that a professor of practice adds? Anything that you want to chime in there?
See, I can add a couple of points. One is, the industry has two things, right? It is going to be on skills, right? What is relevant for them to do the tasks that are required, right? At some level, and we are primarily talking about management education, and you become relevant when you are general enough to be able to deal with new problems, right? So most of the time, the practice industry-led curriculum is very targeted for a purpose for why they are hiring, right? So that's not, it's not to enhance the level of education, it is to make them job ready, right? So already we have a problem in management education as saying that's a ticket to higher paying jobs, right? So that's already overplayed, right? So professor of practice role is more on making people think for the longer term than specific about a role or an industry as they start, right? I would think of it as a non-competing because their goals are different.
Cool. I'll just kind of summarize the rest of the comments and questions. One is people are looking at, look, what kind of pathways. So, for example, one Pankaj asks, how do I approach an institution? Can you please elaborate on this? Who's the Shaker wants to know, will IIFR help me get into this profession? Viba asked, I'd like to know how to find the opportunities to teach us pop. So, how do people open doors, and which doors do they knock? And how does this entire networking, how does this dance work? Any tidbits from some of you who have already gone through the process?
So let me start by saying it's not easy, because it is an extremely competitive market right now. That is a fact, right? I've known people who have knocked on several doors, but unfortunately, this is a purely networking-based thing. So it is your networks that will get you the first opportunity, whether it's so one of the advantages I found from my ISB EFPM is that that was the network that got me all the teaching assignments and all the roles that I have. So creating those networks is very critical. As professionals, we didn't have an academic network. You will now need to create those networks. But let me also tell you, it's not easy. It's because there is a lot of competition for these. And unless there is something very unique in what you're proposing, highly unlikely that it will be taken up. And there's also, let me also be very frank, there's also healthy skepticism of professors of practice, not professors of practice, but of industry folks. They're fine for, the feeling is that they're fine for guest speakers and things like that. But teaching a full course, there is a healthy skepticism. So overcoming that skepticism is also a challenge. So it's not easy. And it is purely network based. There is no formal process for this.
I would like to add on to that in the sense, I think we have already emphasized the part of the network, but you also have to put yourself, this basic marketing and strategy. You have to put yourself in the institute shoes and basically say, what is it that you bring into the table? And for that, you will get that window. You can reach out directly, but you have to have a proposal beyond saying, I am who's who and I want to come and teach. Okay, that's wallpaper. That doesn't demand a response, and that will not get a response.
Right.
So you have to put in the hard work to figure out where's the gap.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out how can I translate that gap into a learning, into a course. It could be a 1-day workshop, it could be a 2-day workshop, it could be a 5-day program, it could be a 10-credit course, it could be a 20-credit course. And for which you'll need to actually figure out what does it make a course. The guide I give to people every time I could get this request at least twice a week is, okay, figure out the course you want to teach, build up a basic curriculum, and then reach out. You will get a response.
Murali, if I may add one more on the network part, right? So, for example, if a network, let's say I know 10 people, right? I'm taking as a persona, not as an individual, right? The biggest one is it is competitive. Second is also a question of credibility, right? So if I'm going to refer somebody and show them up in a particular course, my reputation is at stake, right? It's not like we are all world famous, but the point is in the places that we operate in academic environment, it is very cumulative and it's unforgiving, right? If I do a course with poor rating in a particular year, there's almost like Brian Lara's statement, right? Your next score starts at 0. You keep proving yourself every time, and you don't want casual actors to be part of your network, right? So which means one is having something differentiated, as Prakash said, and second is the confidence that you can inspire in the network, that you will cross the threshold of acceptance, right? So that we've had issues with that, right? And there are times where the network starts remembering it for a long time. So when you show up, it is better to underposition yourselves and underplay the game rather than, for example, taking up a full course and trying to say that you can do it, right? So do it in almost like options thinking, right? You take a risk where the risk of failure is tolerable for you, and then keep playing that, and that adds confidence, because knowing somebody is not adequate, because it's not like sending a resume and reference, right? This is about a performance. It's almost, Phil Zerillo, who almost taught all of us how to teach, this is a performing art, right? And think of it as stand-up comedy, right? Which is serious, right? So you can't skip a beat. So
Got it. On that, I'll just add this point on the way IIFR is thinking about both network and content. We completely realize that, look, you can learn the art and craft of teaching, etc., but unless you have useful content, right, it's difficult for you to go knock doors with any institution. So that's one thing that we are super clear of. Like, we wouldn't just teach you how to do it, but mentor you through let's say a 2-3 month process where you maybe create your own course design, you write your own case, and these are assets that you take forward into the market and use that to showcase what you're capable of. Now, whether you teach that course or not is secondary, because it's also a function of what the institution wants, but at least this is a showcase of your capability. So that's one thing that we are fairly committed to helping you with. The other point which everybody brought out is one of networks, and here's the way we see this. One, of course, is the quality of the faculty that we bring to the table. So that's an opening to the network. For example, I think Srini alluded to it. Even for me, my first network was my EFPM faculty and peers and alums. So that was one. So that's one part of opening networks. Second is the way we want to involve the EFMT India Business Council, which of course has some of the top deans and directors of top business schools in the country. Get them involved in the process. And the third is the way we are thinking about the Pracademic Circle, which is a both offline, online community of Pracademics, which will have people from pretty much all dispensations, corporate, academia, converging at regular intervals on topics of mutual interest, which again provides opportunities to build networks, build credibility, which can then lead to opening doors. We are 7 minutes beyond over time. I wish we could go on, but I think I'll be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much, my panelists, for taking this time and making it a super enriching discussion. And of course, the 60 plus participants that at least I counted last, who've been super engaged, multiple thumbs up, a lot of hearts flowing. It was good fun. Seemed like an Instagram live with all the hearts flowing. But hey, thanks so much for this lovely engagement. We'll try and summarize this, obviously put up the video, but we'll also put up LinkedIn posts trying to capture the essence of what we discussed today, and distill it, and then you can use it. And I look forward to seeing some of you in the first cohort of the ECP. Good luck, take care, and have a wonderful weekend. Take care and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.